What if your hero is a monster barely holding onto their humanity? What if the setting is dangerous and malevolent, twisting hope into despair? Dark fantasy asks us to walk into darkness, but what draws us to those darker corners? Is it the twisted characters, the ominous worlds, or the sense that the light might not win this time? Dark fantasy gives us flawed, desperate survivors. It shows us the cost of magic and the necessity of moral compromise. It's a genre where every shadow holds danger, and even the most powerful are haunted by their choices. If epic fantasy invites us to dream, dark fantasy dares us to confront the nightmare. In this video, we're exploring the unique ways dark fantasy builds worlds dripping with dread, the complex characters navigating moral gray zones, and how it uses themes like corruption, decay, survival, and sacrifice to grip us by the throat.
Dark fantasy takes the grandeur of epic fantasy, which we already explored in the previous video, but trades its shiny ideals for moral ambiguity, flawed heroes, and worlds where light isn't guaranteed to prevail. If epic fantasy is about heroism and hope, dark fantasy is about survival and sacrifice. Let's talk about what makes this genre so compelling and how to channel its unique flavor for your own storytelling. Let's get to it.
Dark fantasy may be a little bit harder to define because it has a lot of different branches. What all of them have in common, however, is how much they differ from the shiny, hopeful tone of classic fantasy. These stories thrive on grit, worlds that are dirty, dangerous, and unforgiving. The tone is often bleak, with characters who don't always know if they're doing the right thing, or even if there is a right thing. It's not about heroes saving the day, but about people clawing their way through corruption and decay, sometimes just to survive. The beauty of this tone is its honesty. Life isn't always fair, and neither are these settings.
Fear is a constant companion in dark fantasy. Fear of what's lurking in the shadows, fear of betrayal, and sometimes fear of oneself. Corruption is everywhere, infecting everything from magic to governments to the characters themselves. But it's the fragility of hope that makes dark fantasy hit so hard. When everything is bleak, even the tiniest glimmer of light feels monumental. It's about finding or losing that shred of hope in a world that seems determined to crush it.
Some of the common elements in the subgenre include dark magic, dangerous and corrupting, often with a price that's too steep to ignore, curses symbolizing the burden characters may carry, and a pessimistic worldview that assumes the world is succumbing to moral and actual decay.
The worlds themselves feel oppressive and hostile, like they're actively working against the characters. The heroes are rarely noble paragons. They're flawed, morally complex, and sometimes not much better than the villains. And speaking of villains, dark fantasy loves to pit its characters against powerful, intimidating antagonists who embody the worst aspects of the world, challenging the heroes to either rise above or sink to their level.
It's tricky sometimes to put these subgenres into boxes, but I would consider grimdark as a branch of dark fantasy. It's a subgenre where the worlds are brutally unfair, morality is a luxury, and even the so-called heroes are often just as flawed as the villains. There's a cynical edge to it. Hope exists, but it's fleeting, and survival often comes at the cost of one's humanity. Gothic fantasy is also another branch. It blends the supernatural with a heavy dose of atmosphere and melodrama, often set in decaying castles, eerie landscapes, or shadowy towns. It's a genre soaked in mystery, tragedy, and the tension between humanity and the unknown. The tone is darkly romantic, exploring themes of obsession, death, and human ambition. Take Bloodborne. Its haunting world of Arnhem is steeped in Gothic architecture and eldritch horror, where madness and blood-soaked rituals drive the story. Or Dracula, which captures the eerie allure of Transylvanian castles and the tragic seduction of vampirism. And Frankenstein, where Mary Shelley crafts a tale of ambition gone horribly wrong as Victor's obsession with creating life leads to ruin and despair. Gothic fantasy thrives on beauty and horror intertwined. Urban dark fantasy would be another branch. It brings the supernatural into the modern world, blending gritty cityscapes with magic, monsters, and mystery. The tone is often sharp, fast-paced, and laced with danger. Think of Neil Gaiman's Sandman, where Morpheus, the Lord of Dreams, moves through our world and others, weaving haunting tales that explore the power of stories and the human psyche. urban dark fantasy thrives on showing how the supernatural hides in plain sight, just under the surface of our everyday lives.
I could think of many other branches of the subgenre. Some sword and sorcery stories could also be categorized as a dark fantasy. Even Witcher would be a good fit for that. Cosmic horror is often explored with dark fantasy as well. Like a lot of Lovecraft's work, there's also paranormal, post-apocalyptic, and psychological dark fantasy. But we can go on and on here. Let me know in the comments if I forgot anything.
World building in dark fantasy leans heavily on atmosphere. Unlike epic fantasy's grand sweeping landscapes, dark fantasy settings often feel claustrophobic, hostile, and oppressive. The world itself can act like an antagonist, whether it's a cursed swamp, a city teeming with corruption, or a land ravaged by endless war. The goal is to make the environment reflect the story's tone, so readers feel the weight of despair and danger with every step the characters take. Magic in dark fantasy is rarely the shiny, awe-inspiring tool it can be in epic fantasy. Instead, it's more like playing with fire, unpredictable, corrupting, and almost always coming at a high price. Maybe a spell drains the user's life force, or maybe it unleashes consequences far worse than intended. This makes magic feel dangerous and adds a layer of tension to its use. Every time a character taps into it, readers should be on edge. In dark fantasy, societies often mirror the tone of the world, broken, corrupt, or ruled by oppressive regimes. Institutions that might offer hope in epic fantasy, like noble kings or wise councils, are often rotting from within, serving self-interest or exploiting the weak. The common people might be struggling to survive in a system designed to crush them, while those in power cling to their thrones through deceit and tyranny. The Witcher is a quintessential example of dark fantasy world building with its bleak tone. The continent is a hostile and oppressive land, its swamps and war-torn villages teeming with danger and despair. Magic is a double-edged sword offering immense power at a steep and often corrupting cost. While those who wield it are feared and distrusted, society mirrors this decay, with noble houses mired in scheming, common folk crushed under oppressive systems, and monsters both literal and metaphorical lurking everywhere.
When building a dark fantasy setting, think of it as a character in its own right. One that's broken, dangerous, and out to get your protagonist. Maybe the land is dying, poisoned by some ancient curse. Or maybe the people themselves are treated by fear and greed. Don't explain everything outright. Let your readers feel the unease in the crumbling ruins, the whispered legends, or the way the air feels heavier on the atmosphere of the setting. And don't forget scarcity, whether it's food, clean water, or even hope. When survival is a struggle, every decision feels bigger, every moment tenser. Make the world reflect the grim reality your characters are up against.
Dark fantasy thrives on flawed heroes, characters who are far from perfect and often wrestle with their own darker instincts. These protagonists feel more human because they're not always selfless or noble.
Maybe they're haunted by past mistakes, tempted by power, or driven by revenge. What makes them compelling is that their struggles feel real and their victories, however small, come hard-earned. It is not about being a shining beacon of hope. It's about surviving in a world that's determined to break them and still finding a way to move forward, even if it means walking a darker path.
Griffith from Berserk is a prime example of a character who starts as a hero but descends into darkness. Ambitious and charismatic, Griffith is driven by his dream to rule a kingdom, but his willingness to sacrifice anything and anyone leads to catastrophic consequences. Griffith's arc is captivating because it goes with the genre's themes of corruption and the cost of power, making him both tragic and terrifying. In dark fantasy, the best villains are driven by their own desires, fears, or warped sense of justice. These are antagonists who feel like real people, not caricatures. Maybe they see themselves as the hero of their own story, or maybe their actions stem from pain, betrayal, or desperation.
A villain with depth makes the conflict feel more personal and nuanced, challenging the protagonist in ways that go beyond physical confrontation. When we understand why a villain does what they do, even if we hate them for it, their presence becomes unforgettable. I definitely don't buy into the current trend that we should go back to villains that are evil for no reason. This is just not interesting enough in my opinion.
Cersei Lannister is a fantastic example of a complex villain. She's ruthless, manipulative, and capable of horrifying acts, but her motivations are rooted in her love for her children, her resentment over being dismissed as just a woman, and her desperate need to secure power in a world stacked against her. While her methods are often cruel, her actions make sense within her worldview, and you can even sympathize with her struggles at times. She desperately craves power, but is so utterly miserable to be stuck in this vicious cycle of death, maneuvering and paranoia to maintain it, that it makes her arc hauntingly tragic. In the subgenre, battles are rarely fought to save the world or protect ideals. They're about survival.
Characters often make desperate choices, not because they're heroic, but because they want to see another day. The stakes feel more visceral when the fight is for something as immediate as life itself.
In The Last of Us, the battles Joel and Ellie face are about surviving in a post-apocalyptic landscape, teeming with infected creatures and desperate humans. Every fight feels raw and immediate, from fending off clickers in the dark to defending against ruthless scavengers. The show and game capture the relentless tension of survival, where every decision, no matter how small, could mean life or death.
It's not about clear lines between good versus evil, but about tough choices with no perfect answer. These shades of gray make the story richer, forcing both the characters and the audience to question their own sense of morality.
In A Song of Ice and Fire, characters like Jaime Lannister embody this complexity. He starts as a seemingly arrogant villain, infamous for killing a king he was sworn to protect. But as the story unfolds, we see different layers of him. Jaime's actions, while often brutal, stem from a sense of loyalty and love for his family, as well as a code of honor that's at odds with his reputation. In a bleak world, hope becomes rare and powerful. It's not the grand, sweeping hope of epic fantasy, but small, fragile moments that shine all the brighter against the darkness. In Pan's Labyrinth, a young girl clings to a fantastical world of fauns and labyrinth to escape the horrors of war. Her moments of wonder are fleeting, but they underscore the importance of finding light, even when it's nearly extinguished. Now, let's discuss some practical tips to make a dark fantasy setting work. Dark fantasy thrives on atmosphere, and your language is the key to crafting it. Use evocative, sensory-driven descriptions to immerse readers in the story's darkness. Instead of just saying, "The forest was creepy," describe the clinging mist that muffles every sound, the faint scent of decay carried on the air, or the brittle outer crunch of dead leaves underfoot.
Paint the shadows with vivid detail, so readers can feel the dread creeping in. The stench of rot, the flicker of a dying torch, or the sound of distant whispers can all bring your setting to life in haunting and memorable ways.
In dark fantasy, the weight of despair can feel overwhelming if it's relentless. Balance is key. Let your characters and readers breathe with small moments of relief or triumph before plunging back into the shadows.
These pauses create emotional peaks and valleys, making the darker moments hit harder. Think of a group of survivors sharing a quiet meal, laughing nervously before being plunged into chaos again. Pacing in dark fantasy is about contrast. The glimmer of light makes the following darkness feel all the more suffocating.
Dark fantasy thrives when it upends traditional fantasy tropes. Use the familiar, heroic quests, noble knights, or benevolent rulers as a foundation, then twist it into something unexpected. Maybe the chosen one is manipulated into causing destruction, or the wise mentor has a darker agenda. Dark fantasy is where the familiar comforts of traditional fantasy are stripped away, leaving us with worlds that are dangerous, oppressive, and morally complex. It's a genre that thrives on flawed heroes, powerful and layered villains, and themes of survival, corruption, and hopelessness. The worlds feel alive and hostile, the magic dangerous and costly, and the battles personal and raw. From gothic castles and cursed swamps to modern cityscapes teeming with dark forces, dark fantasy invites us to confront the shadows, both in the world and within ourselves.
Let me know your favorite dark fantasy settings in the comments. Dark fantasy is a personal favorite of mine because it incorporates a lot of horror elements, which I'm a big fan of. We will continue the series exploring other fantasy subgenres. Feel free to check out the other videos about this in our genre deep dive playlist. specifically the epic fantasy world building video we did last week. Also, you can suggest which subgenre we should tackle next in the comments. Come join our Tavern discussion of fantasy storytelling and world building here at Loregeist. Give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell for notifications. Thanks for watching, and may your tales be ever epic.